I have to cover ProStreet. Ahoy there. I'm not gonna lie to you, I've been hesitant to cover Need for Speed ProStreet, especially since I can only deal with the quote-unquote inferior PlayStation 2 version. But from the comment sections of my past couple of racing game videos, this recommendation kept popping up. Some mentioned the soundtrack, so I'll start by disappointing you with a tired-out Content ID excuse. Anyway, it helps to know thy adversary. ProStreet came out in 2007, the best year of my gaming childhood, as it was the year my family got a Wii. What a time to be alive and in blissful ignorance of the Xbox 360. ProStreet came out on basically every platform that wasn't the original Xbox or the GameCube, arriving on the aforementioned 360, the PS3, the Wii, the PC, and what we're looking at, the PS2. It also came out on handhelds, but you don't need me to tell you that they weren't made by Black Box. A year after Battlestar Galactica, aka Carbon, EA decided that illegal street racing was passé, and that closed circuits were the new hotness. They'd get more into depth with that next year with Shift, but ProStreet uses both real racetracks and puts a high emphasis on real-life locales. More on the locales in a bit. Unlike Carbon, ProStreet was designed for the HD consoles of the time, that being the 360 and the PS3, with that version being downported to the Wii and PS2. We're looking at the PS2 version via PCSX2 because I don't have it for either 360 or PS3, and the PC port wasn't as good, and probably won't run well on modern versions of Windows. The PS2 version is considered to be the second worst version of this game, only slightly ahead of the Wii. Gee, I wonder why that version ranked so low. And apparently the 360 version used to let you upgrade your cars with Microsoft points. Ahead of its time for all the wrong reasons. The story goes that you're an anonymous weirdo named Ryan Cooper, who has a knack for never taking off his helmet. He's like Master Chief in a way, only if he was voiced by someone who'd never done voice acting in their life. You enter the ProStreet competition with your ultimate goal to take down the Five Kings. The first stop on the tour is in Chicago, except on a fictionalized airfield and not O'Hare. Wait, no, actually, this airfield isn't far-fetched from reality. It's just misleading in this day and age. You appear to be racing on Northerly Island given your close proximity to Soldier Field. It's just that a lot has changed since 2007. The acting is once again as bad as I imagined.
I don't know about this Cooper guy. He never would have cut it back in the day. They must have really lowered the standards this year.
Well, okay, the guy won, but he did not look pretty behind the wheel. It physically pained me to watch that guy drive, you know what I'm saying? I don't know how he made it.
Ugh, I feel myself cringing inside. It makes Carbon look like Downton Abbey.
First race.
I think you're supposed to win this one on purpose, and what I've determined is that I should be turning traction and stability controls off. You win the first race and piss off Rio. On to the next thing. Viva Nevada! After taking a moment to catch my breath from the flight to Nevada, I've got to say I'm not really thrilled going in. Maybe my initial indifference is because I've set my expectations too low. If you haven't caught my drift, I'm someone who prefers arcade-style racing games and not full simulations. I'm sorry! I have this image in my head of what my ideal racing game is, and so far, this ain't it. But we're gonna be fair here and spend more time playing to form a more definitive answer. Maybe then it'll change my mind. We're gonna start off with how this game looks, which is to say on the PS2, it doesn't. But at least it's running at 60 FPS here on PCSX2. I can imagine that it doesn't run that way at all on real hardware, especially given how black box games almost always ran at 30 during gameplay and started choking on its particles when things heated up. For a late PS2 game, it's very conservative in its rendering, given how it's downported from HD consoles. Part of this port's lack of visual appeal may be down to PCSX2, since the bump to 1080p makes these graphical shortcuts more obvious. It also lacks support for progressive scan and widescreen, even though the HD versions run in widescreen. Lame. At least the car models are nicely detailed. If there's anything NFS games didn't skimp on, it's their car rosters. The majority of the cars featured are ones you'd actually want to drool over. There's tuner cars like the AE86, 240SX, and Cobalt SS. There's muscle cars like the Mustang, Camaro, and Challenger. And then there's exotics like the 911, the Murcielago, and the Zonda. But then you also have things you'd never want to drive, like an Audi S4. Thankfully, those kinds of duds are few and far between. Okay, remember when I said that the car models are nicely detailed a few seconds ago? At least the car models are nicely detailed. That really only applies to your car. Your car is given high priority and level of detail, which means your opponents look much more jagged and rough. You could open boxes with those car models. Speaking of level of detail, the areas you visit across the campaign are rather drab and unexciting. Sure, it has all the glitz and glamour of being an organized motorsport, but the cutbacks to get it running on PS2 are obvious in the lack of crowds. Look, the bleachers are empty. And let's not forget Geometry Pop-In. Not to mention that the Race Day Festival sites are reduced to a slideshow of static images from the HD versions. The UI fading out when waiting seems tacked on since you're not actually panning around a festival site. I'm guessing Black Box didn't have enough time to do something like making the screen an FMV, which doesn't surprise me given the release schedule of NFS games at this point. Now, since this is still a Need for Speed game post-Underground, car customization was almost a given. It continues from where Carbon left off and allows you to spend your hard-earned cash on performance and visual upgrades. Car performance plays a much larger role in ProStreet given its semi-realistic racing, and that's apparent in the return of Auto Sculpt. Now, I was first introduced to Auto Sculpt in Need for Speed Nitro of all games, and it is pretty cool to reshape your aero. While you can make your car look sorta like a Bosozoku reject, it may negatively impact your car's drag coefficient and hinder your top speed. Although it is nice to customize your car, I also found it somewhat boring. It's just so slow. This is one example where I think the HD versions do things better since you have to wait for what you have selected to load in. That may sound totally normal to you, but just try to move a decal on the car. I didn't really bother with editing decals and vinyls just because of how excruciatingly slow it is to navigate. Plus, you occasionally get to watch the car's body panels disappear. Forza's livery editor has aged way better in this regard since all vinyls update smoothly, but even then, Forza's editor is showing its age. Remember MSN Autos, anyone? The fact that I had to listen to racing ambiance instead of the game's soundtrack made this part more boring than it should. So I'd recommend listening to the soundtrack or putting on your own music while you sculpt your car like Silly Putty. The biggest bone I have to pick with customization is that you can only save one set of blueprints for one racing discipline at a time. That means if you want to make a blueprint for both drag racing and grip racing, you can go straight to hell. It even has the gall to wipe your existing blueprints when you change modes for that car. Take one good look at that custom Chevy Cobalt I got from the first drag racing events. It's the last time you'll ever see it when converting it for grip racing. Then again, you'd probably have enough money left over from winning events to make it faster than that 240SX you have to start with. Yes, it's a 240SX, and yes, it's the one with the truck motor. Getting back onto the track, ProStreet plays like what you might call a simcade racer. It's got arcade-style controls with a hint of realism. This is most evident in the game's handling model, which may sound off-putting. You'll notice the sim parts of handling by your inability to brake and turn at the same time. It is possible to drift, but not to the extent of games like Ridge Racer. That means you can also spin out if you don't know what you're doing. The controls in this game seem standard to most PS2 racing games, in which the default control option lets you accelerate with cross and brake with square. This makes my thumb hurt over extended play regardless of what controller I use. Fortunately, ProStreet also gives you the 6th generation option of using the right analog stick for acceleration and braking. Unfortunately, that's its own separate control scheme. It also confusingly binds your manual transmission to buttons R1 and R2 with a clutch bound to the left side. This seems almost backwards from what was established in prior NFS games, and it also rears its ugly head in drag racing. More on that when I get to the different race types. I'd say the handling in ProStreet is slightly stiffer than older NFS games, but that's also because of the increased level of realism. As a simcade game, I can't say I hate the controls, but I also can't say I love them. It feels like the two styles are at odds with themselves. Underground did simcade handling better in my opinion, since you still need to brake before corners. However, your car doesn't lock up like ProStreet if you try to brake and turn simultaneously. I want to say I like the audio presentation in this game, but honestly I can't. In addition to the previously mentioned cringeworthy voice acting,
It physically pained me to watch that guy drive, you know what I'm saying?
what irritated me the most was the tire squeal. It's almost as bad as Virtual Racing's tire squeal, and when you're comparing bad sound design to a game from the early 1990s, you know something's fishy. The game uses a licensed soundtrack that people mentioned was really good, but like I said at the start, it's licensed, so I can't use it in this video. The soundtrack mainly consists of world and rock music, which does fit with the camouflage splattered art direction. There's also original music composed for this game to sound similar to the other licensed songs in the game, and they were all handled by Junkie XL, aka Tom Holkenborg. Oh good, it's nice to know that the composer for Forza Motorsport and Alita Battle Angel was behind the soundtrack. Sounds made by the cars themselves, as in their engines, are definitely not bad at all. To me it sounds like they got live recordings of most of the cars and their exhaust notes. They sound pretty good. I say most of the cars because the game's cover car, the Nissan GTR, wasn't out yet, so Black Box had to improvise a bit. It sounds terrible no matter what flavor of GTR you pick. By 2007, the Need for Speed series established itself as the premier open-world racer, with the pinnacle being 2005's Most Wanted. Not this game. ProStreet sets itself not in a fictionalized open world, but in real-life locations. They are the aforementioned Northerly Island Airfield in Chicago, Illinois, Willow Springs Raceway in Los Angeles, California, Infineon Raceway, also in California, Portland International Raceway in, well, Portland, Oregon, Mondello Park, aka the only raceway in Ireland, Autopolis, Tokyo Dockyards, and Ibisu in Japan, Autobahn Ring, an enclosed section of the German Autobahn because I guess they couldn't be bothered getting the Nürburgring Nordschleife, Nevada Highway, and the Late Texas World Speedway in College Station, Texas, which was closed in 2017, demolished as of recently, and became a housing community called Southern Point, with an E. Again, a lot has changed over 16 years. It'd be a shame if the game wasn't pick up and play in nature. Well then, shame on EA. Like I mentioned, ProStreet plants itself in simcade territory. The core racing structure revolves around race days, which is your career structure. Each race day consists of several events, but generally you only need to accumulate enough personal score to win the day. If you'd like, you can complete all events and try to dominate it.
The only rule you need to remember is that winning isn't enough. You gotta dominate. You earn points by racing. The better you do, the more points you get.
Winning and dominating each race day grants you a random prize you can choose, from cash and car upgrades to repair markers. It's similar to how Most Wanted deals out its prizes. Throughout all your race days, you compete in 4 different types of races. The first 2 actually use the same car discipline, so I'll group them together: grip racing and time attack. Grip racing is the standard lap race around a closed circuit. Time attack is where you run laps for the best time, but you also do them against a full grid. The third race type is drag racing. Unlike its previous incarnations, this version of drag racing is much more technical and downright blasphemous to veteran NFS players. You first have to heat your tires to have better grip off the starting line. You then have to time your launch perfectly to get the best jump, but consequently it's also possible to jump a gun and fail the heat. This version of drag racing also lets you steer the car independently, as opposed to being gated by lanes, completely going against the grain of how NFS handles its straight-line racing. And lastly, there's drift racing. Take everything I said about the handling and throw it out the driver's side window. Drift events are as arcadey as they get. Every turn is replaced by going slideways. No, I didn't stutter. You don't need to do much to initiate a drift, but you will find yourself using the brake and handbrake to keep your power slide contained. You'll also be gripping the steering for dear life, trying to wrestle your car the other way to go through corners. I feel like something's missing, though. Maybe this. Why is there no replay function? At the time I'm playing this, I haven't encountered any drift events yet, so I set up my own, which means I wasn't able to use this Pontiac GTO because no one would expect a classic muscle car to be a drift car. By the way, you can only use rear-wheel drive cars for drift events. You can't use a Cobalt SS or a Skyline GTR. Out of all the racing I did, I found it refreshing to play a racing game that encourages clean driving. Forza almost always has the pack becoming a tight-knit plate of spaghetti in the first corner, and the cheating drivatars force you to trade paint. Trying to do the same thing in ProStreet will only put you in debt. Trying to get physical, intentionally or unintentionally, can cause damage cosmetically and mechanically, which can have a negative impact on your car's performance. Take too much damage and the car is toast. Cars do take damage, though to what extent on the PS2 version, I'll never know. Probably little to no visual damage aside from scratches and cracked windows like most wanted. I don't know, I have no intention of knowing since I value my pocketbook. Cars can be repaired in between races during race day. You normally use money to fix your car, but you can also use repair markers to fix your car at no extra cost, thanks to the fine folks at Progressive. But if you total your car in a race, it's done for the day. Kaput. Stick a fork in it. The game allows you to bring a spare car if you trash your first ride, but that's dependent on if you even have a spare ride blueprint in the first place. Scrap all your rides and it's... Game over, yeah! The constant threat of completely screwing up your car or scrapping it plays into how you're supposed to drive in this game. This means minimizing contact with the other drivers. But I found this easy to do since they're about as intelligent as a brick wall when it comes to racing.
They must have really lowered the standards this year.
Maybe it's because I'm early on in the game driving the 240SX against cars that are more powerful than it. But as you can see, power isn't everything. At least not in grip races. I'm facing off against muscle cars in the 1960s, but they handle as you would expect since they're about as heavy as a whale. To quote Lotus founder Colin Chapman, "Adding power makes you faster on the straights. Subtracting weight makes you faster everywhere." So of course you can upgrade your car to make it lighter and faster. Upgrades aren't cheap though, and you need to make sure to save some money in case things go south during a race. Tuning is also here, but I've rarely been able to wrap my head around most of these settings in any racing game. Even with what ProStreet offers for races, I found them surprisingly boring. There's no rubber banding, which is a blessing and a curse, as I feel the races are too easy. And because cash flow is low unless you dominate a race day, you won't be able to save up for anything better than a hot rod. Don't forget that you have to repair a car if you break something, which eats into your wallet. And don't forget the PS2 downgrades that suck all the life from the game's atmosphere.
Alright, before I forget, check this out, people. For the next 10 minutes and 10 minutes only, the lovely Sophia is going to be posing with 4 very famous cars.
ProStreet is kinda mid, at least how I played it. It shines in some areas and the racing is sound, but it's kind of a jarring departure from the NFS games of old. Not to mention that the PS2 hardware limited what Black Box could do with this downport. Races take some time to get a grasp on, especially with the skew towards increased realism, but when you do get used to them, it's a non-issue. It's just that I feel like the game is way too easy for me to get any genuine enjoyment. Maybe the difficulty does ramp up when and if I get access to faster cars, but races aren't very thrilling to me and don't keep me engaged. I'm sure things will be slightly better on the HD versions, but I don't have them and they can't be emulated properly yet. What the HD versions did have was downloadable content. These DLCs added new cars and tracks to the game, including the Leipzig test track that Black Box used to gather physics data from, as well as the Tokyo Expressway. DLC cars also included the McLaren F1 and the Bugatti Veyron. I don't even think you can download these anymore since all online functionality was shut down in 2012, But you didn't need to download anything anyway, since one of the updates broke the game on PS3 and PC. You win some, you lose some. Badly. So far, I give Need for Speed Pro Street a meh rating. I'm not implying that this game sucks, I just don't think it's very exciting. Maybe I just didn't choose the right version of the game to play. My overall thoughts on Pro Street are middling. There are some parts of the game that I like, but other parts that left me underwhelmed. I'm not mad at this game, thankfully, I'm just indifferent. I don't have any strong feelings about this game one way or the other. Maybe this wasn't a valid way to look at this game, so if I get my hands on the HD version of this game, I'll give it another go. I see potential in Pro Street, but I currently don't have the best setup to realize it. The least I can say right now is I don't have any negativity towards the game. It's gotta count for something, right? I'll see if I can give Pro Street a reappraisal when and if I get my hands on the HD version. But what do you all think? Should I keep going with what I'm doing right now and come back later? Or do you have any fond memories of this game regardless of what system it's on? Let me know in the comments. Until then, this is Squiddy the Kid, signing off.